In a life consumed by regret and loss, what if you were given one chance to rewrite your fate? What will you do? Our story begins on a battlefield, where Giselle, the king of mercenaries, faces off against Aiden, the noble knight. The clash of their swords sends sparks flying, echoing through the blood-soaked field. "It's over, Giselle," Aiden said. Defeated and bleeding, Giselle faced Aiden, who stood before him with an air of triumph. Aiden mocked him, calling him a lowly mercenary unworthy of standing among the 7 strongest. But as the conversation continued, Aiden revealed a chilling truth. "To think you were the heir of Ferdium," Aiden sneered. "Did you know we were the ones who destroyed your family?" Giselle's eyes widened in shock. Aiden wasn't even from Britannia, how could he have been involved? With a smirk, Aiden explained that the Delphini Duchy hadn't acted alone. They had allies from other nations, including Aiden himself. Overwhelmed by rage and disbelief, Giselle tried to rise, but his body was broken beyond repair. Aiden raised his sword and ended it with a single strike. His severed head fell to the ground. But when he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the afterlife or even a prison. Instead, he found himself in a simple military tent, surrounded by unfamiliar sights. A soldier entered, carrying something. Giselle acted swiftly, drawing the sword near him and moving like lightning. "Shh," he warned, pressing the blade against the soldier's throat. "If you answer my questions obediently, I'll let you live." After a brief hesitation, he added softly, "Maybe." The soldier, startled but seemingly accustomed to such antics, sighed with an air of annoyance. "Young master," the soldier muttered, "why are you doing this again? Are you bored? Can't you just return to the castle, huh?" Giselle was at a loss for words, completely bewildered. The soldier continued, "You're supposed to be commanding the raid on the orcs, but here you are throwing a tantrum. Pick up your things already." Giselle, shocked, asked where the soldier was heading. "Where? To the Ferdium estate, of course," the soldier replied. Giselle's eyes widened in disbelief. He rushed outside to confirm what he'd just heard. Before him stood the Ferdium estate, tall and mighty, restored to its former glory. He pinched himself to ensure he wasn't dreaming. It couldn't be real. This estate had been reduced to ruins in his past life, but now, here it was, standing strong. Looking at his reflection in a nearby bucket of water, he noticed his younger face. Coupled with the restored estate, he came to a startling realization. He had traveled back to the past. Giselle's mind raced. His younger self had resented his household. Back then, he was immature and fled his home, only to return years later as a renowned mercenary. By that time, the estate was in ruins, and he had lost everything. But now, everything was still intact. He rejoiced briefly at the chance to make amends, but then he stopped. He remembered something critical. Today was the day when everyone in the raid squad died. Giselle followed the orc raid, recalling the details vividly. The scouts had reported only 3 orcs, an easy target for the squad. But upon arrival, they discovered more than 20 orcs waiting to ambush them. He rushed to the battlefield, determined to prevent the same tragedy from happening again. The commander was shouted orders, "Get into formation," as the orcs attacked, but the soldiers were overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. Suddenly, an orc attacked from behind, breaking their ranks. Giselle rushed forward, killing the orc with a single, decisive strike. The commander and soldiers stared at him in shock. Giselle's movements were far too skilled and precise for someone his age. Turning to the commander, Giselle said firmly, "Give me command of the squad. Now." The commander refused, stating that even if Giselle was the young master, he could not give him command over the soldiers' lives. At that moment, an orc approached. The commander ordered Giselle to fall back, but Giselle threw his sword. The commander grew angry and grabbed Giselle by the collar, demanding an explanation. However, when he turned back, he realized Giselle swiftly killed the orc, targeting its weak points with precision. The commander stared in disbelief as Giselle effortlessly killed the orc. "Do you know what's most important in battle?" Giselle asked the commander. "If soldiers are filled with fear, there is no hope of winning. We need to gain momentum." With those words, he charged forward, leaping into the air and slicing through an orc mid-flight. "Come at me, orcs, I will kill all of you," he shouted, drawing the attention of the entire orc horde. Giselle began cutting them down one by one. Despite his extraordinary swordsmanship, Giselle's stamina was beginning to run out. His younger body, still unaccustomed to such strenuous combat, slowed down. The commander watched in awe as Giselle moved with calculated efficiency, using the smallest movements to dodge attacks and strike at the orc's weak spots. Giselle's skill was so refined, he looked like a seasoned swordsman. He taunted the orcs, daring them to face him, and then began running towards a nearby cliff. The soldiers thought he was retreating, but the commander quickly realized Giselle was setting up a trap. He ordered the soldiers to form a shield wall and follow Giselle. As Giselle fought at the cliff's edge, his energy drained. He saw the soldiers and commander approaching in formation. With his remaining strength, Giselle leapt off the cliff and called for the soldiers to act. The soldiers pushed the orcs over the cliff, and the battle was finally won. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but then the commander saw Giselle hanging from the cliff by his sword. He called out for Giselle to grab his hand, but the young master lost consciousness, and his body began to fall. As Giselle fell, his mind wandered to memories of his younger sister. He remembered her asking him to spend time with her, but he always refused her. His thoughts were interrupted as he suddenly woke up, feeling the pain in his body. Confused and disoriented, Giselle pushed himself up, his aching body reminding him that everything was real. As he struggled to sit up, the door opened, and a young maid with white hair entered. "Are you awake? I was so worried," she said, her voice gentle. Giselle's heart skipped a beat when he saw her. It was Belinda, the maid who had cared for him in his past life. He rushed towards her, overjoyed. She had been the only one who cared for him despite his immaturity. Belinda looked at him, a little confused. "Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? Did you do something wrong again?" she asked, trying to calm him down. Belinda raised an eyebrow and asked, "We see each other every day. What's making you so happy today?" Giselle met her gaze and said, "The truth is, I died and came back to life." Belinda interrupted, sensing the nonsense he was about to speak. Yes, you died from an orc and then resurrected in your bed." "Wow, how amazing," she teased. Giselle nodded with a resigned expression. He had been thrust back into the past, and the whirlwind of battles had kept him from organizing his thoughts. But when he looked at Belinda's face, one thing became clear: the festival. He had missed it in his previous life, and it was the day his sister, Elena, died. "How long until the festival?" Giselle asked, his voice tight with urgency. Belinda replied, "A week from now." Giselle's heart sank. He had no idea how much time had passed, but the festival was approaching fast, and he couldn't afford to make the same mistakes. The door creaked open, and a young girl peeked inside. "Brother?" Giselle's eyes widened as he saw her. It was his younger sister, Elena, looking about 16 or 17, with blonde hair. "Elena!" Giselle shouted in surprise as he rushed toward her, pulling her into a tight hug. Elena, startled by her brother's sudden affection, gasped. "Appa," she said, looking slightly frightened. Giselle's shoulders trembled as he held her. He had never been so affectionate with her in the past. Giselle smiled softly. "I really missed you." Elena's face turned pale for a moment. "What kind of prank is this? What are you plotting now?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Giselle chuckled, but he was genuinely relieved. His sister was still here, alive. They hadn't shared the best relationship in the past, but now, everything felt different. Driven by his inferiority complex, Giselle had been quick-tempered, always pushing people away, especially Elena. "Did the orc hit you in the head?" Elena joked as she noticed Giselle's unusual behavior. Despite her teasing, Giselle felt a sense of relief. He had thought about his past life, how he had never truly appreciated his sister's presence. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, and two soldiers entered, asking for Elena. She was supposed to help with the festival preparations. Giselle asked why she was involved, and Belinda replied, "The estate is in poor condition. You wouldn't know since you always laze around." Giselle felt ashamed but then declared, "I'll help too." Both the maid and his sister were shocked. Giselle's declaration surprised them both. For years, he had been too focused on his mercenary life to take responsibility for his family's estate. Now, seeing his sister alive and well, he realized he had to change, not just for himself, but for her as well. The responsibility of the estate, his family, and the future all weighed on him, but this time, he was determined to do things differently. He would not let the mistakes of the past repeat. As Ghislaine followed his little sister to help, Everyone he passed had expressions that weren't pleasant, mostly a mixture of indifference or silent disdain. "Master, Ghislaine, master," someone called out, running out of breath. Ghislaine recognized the voice and turned around. "Oh, Fergus." It was Fergus, one of the knights who had served as his guardian. Despite being old enough to have retired, he stayed in the castle, faithfully by Ghislaine's side. Elena asked Fergus to take her brother away. Ghislaine sighed and asked the old man to show him the training hall. Fergus led him there, and when Ghislaine entered, he was shocked to see the training grounds in excellent condition. He realized that Fergus had been keeping it well maintained for the young master in this life, just like in the past. Ghislaine smiled and said, "Old man, live a long time. Let's live long together, okay, dying. It's really a terrible feeling." Fergus laughed, asking why Ghislaine was talking as though he had died and come back to life. "The truth is, I died and came back to life," Ghislaine said. Fergus laughed again and replied, Hey, enough of your jokes." Ghislaine entered the training ground and began his mana cultivation. "I don't have much time left, but I need to push myself as far as possible." He had the knowledge and experience from his previous life. If he used it well, he could grow stronger faster than anyone else. However, there wasn't enough time. A week. It's tight, but it's not impossible. Compared to his past life, his current body was in terrible shape. Ghislaine sighed, but with determination, he focused. The surrounding mana began to move, flowing into his body and gathering in the core below his navel. He quickly reached the stage of absorbing and converting mana into his body, an extraordinary feat considering he had been unable to sense mana before. His position as one of the continent's 7 strongest was due to a grimoire he had accidentally discovered in an ancient ruin. It was an incomplete grimoire, old and tattered, with only half of it remaining. Yet, from it, Ghislaine drew inspiration to recreate his mana cultivation technique. Woong, mana gathered in Ghislaine's right chest, forming a new core. Then another core formed in his left chest. The cores began to interconnect and circulate mana. This unique cultivation method allowed Ghislaine to harness explosive power. His strength was the reason he became known as the King of Mercenaries. But every strength has a weakness. Ghislaine's cultivation technique was extremely unstable. As expected, it's difficult to manage. The mana in his 3 cores began to struggle, trying to burst out of his body. Ghislaine focused, suppressing the resistance, forcing the mana to obey his control. For now, 3 cores will have to do. With just 3 cores, he could handle most nights. Ghislaine focused on stabilizing his mana, rather than increasing the number of cores. Even during his time as the King of Mercenaries, 5 cores had been his limit. The burden increased with every additional core. "Anyway, my body won't be able to withstand more than this," he constantly reminded himself of the final moments of his past life. Aden, the noble knight, had been his last opponent. Ghislaine furrowed his brow as he remembered Aden. "The more I think about it, the more furious I get." Aden had worn him down and, with the audacity of a coward, had brought his knights to fight. Aden was someone Ghislaine couldn't guarantee victory against, even in a one-on-one duel. But in a group attack, there was no chance. "If we had fought one-on-one, I would have won." He swore to crush them all this time. In this life, Ghislaine would put an end to the duchy and the people hiding behind it. He would become the strongest, no matter what it took. His eyes glowed with determination. Time passed, and the day of the festival finally arrived. It's today. After strapping his sword to his waist and preparing, Ghislaine headed for Elena. She asked why he had come, as he never liked such events. Ghislaine responded that he should at least attend the festival once in a while. Elena laughed and said she liked how things were now. She mentioned that it seemed like his old self had returned. As Ghislaine escorted her, he fell deep into thought. It's different from before. How he acted affected how others responded, and even his future was shifting subtly. Even if the major events remain the same, I can't calculate every small change. I have to adapt. He knew those targeting the Ferdium family were still a threat. The more Ghislaine interfered with their plans, the more their methods would evolve. Even with knowledge of the future, it was up to him to use that knowledge appropriately based on the current circumstances. There can be no mistakes. He reminded himself of this as he wandered through the festival with Elena. While Elena seemed to be genuinely enjoying herself, Ghislaine's mind remained clouded, unable to immerse himself in the festive atmosphere. This is strange. How did she end up near the slums? Ghislaine thought, noticing Elena's sudden detour. She had been enjoying the central area, showing no signs of wanting to visit the slums. No one had called her there either. It was as if the course of the day had shifted unexpectedly, perhaps because he had decided to accompany her. They wandered for a while longer, and Elena, stretching her arms, sighed and muttered, "It's fun, but it's the same every year. It gets a little dull." Festivals were repetitive, and their impoverished territory had limited resources. It was no surprise Elena found it monotonous. "Isn't there anything more exciting?" she asked. As she glanced around in mild disappointment, one of her escort knights approached and whispered, "My lady, shall we go somewhere else then?" Elena looked at him curiously. Where?" The escort knight, Jamal, smiled warmly. He had been one of Elena's guards for a long time. "I heard something special is happening elsewhere," Jamal said with a smile. Elena's eyes lit up at the news. "Really?" she asked, her tone eager. Ghislaine, however, kept a careful eye on Jamal, silently studying his expression. So, it was you, he thought, sensing there was more to this than met the eye. If you enjoyed this chapter of Ghislaine's saga, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next episode of The Return of the Mercenary King. The battle has only just begun.